Hey, welcome everybody. Dave and Brian Pals, are you out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're here.
All right. Hey, are we ready to chant and get this started on this Saturday evening?
Let's chant.
Okay, let's see if we can pull this off, young man. Here we go. Octopus Radio.
Radio.
Octopus
Radio.
Octopus Radio.
Octopus Radio.
Welcome to another edition of Octopus Radio. It's your audio extension of all things Octopus College Hill, which is a small bar and venue located in the College Hill neighborhood of Cedar Falls, Iowa, just down the block from the University of Northern Iowa. My name's Dave. I own Octopus. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's great to have you along. This is a special Zoom pandemic edition of the program. Everybody who's a host and contributing tonight is in their own house. I'm guessing maybe in their basement, probably.
Oh, yeah.
So it's great to be able to do this. It took us a while to figure out. And once again, we're so glad that you could join us tonight. As always, I'm here with my good friends, Ralph and Brian. So let's go over to Ralph first. He's our archivist. Brian's our DJ. And let's just see how he's doing and what his thoughts are on the show that's coming up tonight, which is a special one.
Tonight is a very special show, Dave. We host Matthew Wilson. And I consider myself an archivist. I'm just an amateur compared to this guy. He sent all kinds of stuff our way, legendary, historical stuff that we're going to get a chance to sample tonight. The folder that popped up on my computer was just sensational. So this is really, really special episode. You know, Matthew and I kind of have the same mindset about capturing music. So I'm just going to sit back and learn tonight. DJ Pals, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm just looking forward to hearing what Matthew brought to the table here. I looked at that list as well, and I just want to hear everything on it. I don't want to have to play any records tonight.
Well, and it's my fault for not saying, but I'm going to say it. What we're doing here is the secret history of the Cedar Valley, a program based around which started as a archival project and an art or multimedia show up at Wartburg College, I believe. So just so those of you who aren't familiar with that and are listening tonight know what we're doing. So we're going to, I think the graphic Matthew gave me and I used to promo this a little bit was, expect it to maybe get, weird? We're definitely going to go into the basement of the Cedar Valley and see what they have to offer. So it doesn't get enough attention. And the important thing about stuff like this and the secret history of Cedar Valley is that if you don't talk about it, it disappears. So we kind of talked about some different ways to get into this. Where are we going to play some different music first, Ralph, or should we dive right in?
Yes, sir. We're going to play some different music. I wouldn't want to take anything away before we set the scene for what Matthew's going to share with us in a little bit, but kind of in the same vein of what we're going to do this evening. Let's start it off with a couple songs by the Minutemen. So let's start off with Political Song from Michael Jackson to Sing off of the legendary Double Nickels on the Dime.
List monitors are right with petition. I have this philosophy. Is your life worth the painting? Is this girl versus must look like a dork. Me naked with textbook poems found against the Nazis. The weird kind of sex symbol. It's speeches that are big dance thumbs. If we heard mortar shells, we cuss more in our songs and cut down the guitar solos. So dig this big crux. Organizing the boys for murder is wrong. 10 years beyond the big sweat point. Man, it was still there ever without you. Coming back around, look, we're coming together for just a second. A peek, a guess. At the wholeness, it's way too big. At the wholeness, it's way too big. Black frame around the funnel. The funnel looks just like a frame. My portrait doesn't look like me. Split red, stab job. Split red, stab job. Not artistic. Horse shit in the breeze. Smells just like home to me. They're back to the map. We set a new course. You're shooting backwards. Spill the beans and make me sing.
All right, Little Minutemen to get us rolling this evening. Started off with Political Song for Michael Jackson to sing and ended that with Split Red, a great, great 7-inch cut from the Minutemen. Matthew, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great, Ralph. I'm great. Happy to be here. Excited to talk about music tonight.
So tell us, why don't we start off by just having you tell us about the Secret History Project, kind of how that started?
Sure. I lived in Cedar Valley most of my life until I turned 18 and then kind of left for a long time. And when I returned in 2005, 2006, I was working at Wartburg teaching, and I was offered an opportunity to run the art gallery there. And I was kind of thinking of cool shows to do that weren't just, what you think of traditional art. And, I thought of this band that some of my brothers were involved with, involving a neighbor whose name was Stephen Ullman. He had a band called the Stephen Ullman Tot Lot Band. And they recorded, I think 6 full-length cassette demos with this kid. And he was 6. And he was this amazing front man. And I just had this dream, I wanted to see the Stephen Ullman Tot Lot Band box set in a glass case. That was kind of the inspiration to it. But it was also all the music that was inspired me growing up in the Cedar Valley, and that was still going on, that people were forgetting about. And so I came up with this idea of putting together the secret history, this history that not a lot of people knew about. And so I just started collecting and gathering information on bands and gathering recordings and flyers and photos. And pretty soon I took on a student intern to help me, Brian McCarty, who did the logo for the Secret History. And, even having an intern, and, it wasn't enough. We needed more people. And that's when I started a media wiki site and invited the entire community to help write the history, because I didn't know it all. I had been out of town for so long, I didn't know a lot about it. So for about a year of my life, all I did was listen to the music in the Cedar Valley and put together an exhibit that I think was the largest art opening in Wartburg College history. I think there were over 200 people were there. And it was just a really fun opportunity. So, want to keep continuing it because music keeps happening in this town. It's awesome. And as Dave said, you got to keep the memory alive, or it kind of disappears.
So I want you to take us back. What was the Cedar Valley like in the 1980s? Like when this secret history was happening, like what was it like to live here?
Yeah, well, Dave, you can chime in here too. I mean, the biggest difference to me, it's a very different town, and in downtown especially. At the time, I remember downtown was just kind of a ghost town, and there were boarded up buildings and dive bars, and not a lot of people went downtown. Which is a stark difference from today. And you got to remember in the 80s, we were recovering from the farm crisis, and raft packing plant laying off people, and it was a depressed economy. So it was a different town, and I think it's easy to forget that. And when I try to talk to my kids about it, or younger people, it's like kind of talking about when you wanted to find new music, you couldn't go to Google, you couldn't go to Spotify, and you had to know someone, or you had to listen to a radio station like KUNI that had a great show, DJ'd by our own Dave Deibler, that turned a lot of people on to great music. And there were underground magazines that were floating around that you could learn about music from different cities, and that's how I first learned about some of the stuff going on in Des Moines that we're about to hear about. It's just through zines, record stores. But I think it was hard to find good music, and you're surrounded by an environment here in the Cedar Valley. I think that at the time there's a lot of hard rock, a lot of classic rock. People got excited about. I remember listening to the Firecracker 500 every July 4th weekend. They play the top 500 rock and roll songs, and was it going to be Stairway to Heaven or I Can't Get No Satisfaction? It's like, wait, that's 20, 30 years old by this point, right? And so to me, it was like, where's my music? Where's, I want to be a part of something. That music was of another age to me.
I think if you're going to understand the 80s in Cedar Falls, and I didn't realize this till maybe a decade later, is how economically depressed it was. My father was fired from John Deere's in 84, which at the time I thought was kind of cool, very selfish way, because their house wouldn't sell. So I had bands practice in the basement over on Homeway Drive. And Barb and I lived above what is now single speed. And the rent there was $125 a month, and it was a great place that price, and the location was a great place to be if you wanted to be in a band, because it was just dirt cheap. You could just really live a pretty quality lifestyle. So, I won't talk too long about it, but I left Cedar Falls High, graduated, went to Minneapolis to try to get a band together, went to Lincoln, Nebraska. And the other thing I would say about Cedar Falls is that when I got back here, there was a flourishing but small music scene, and it really shocked me. With the Dreadnecks and stuff, and then Chris booking shows at Dean's Parkade Lounge. And it really, and to be fair to myself, it wasn't there when I left. But in the 2 years that I was gone, some pivotal figures, showed up in Cedar Falls. And I'm sure we'll be talking about them a little later.
One thing I asked Matthew to think about that we'll talk about a little later, and it'd be great to hear people in the chat kind of chime in on this. I think your Firecracker 500 story really applies to us all. You and I are not too far off in age, but I remember the show, that really just kind of set me on fire for this type of music. It just changed me. And just looking through your archive or what you shared today, like, there were a lot of those shows for you. But I was on a walk today and trying to think about what the mid 80s looked like on radio. And the song that came to mind, and hopefully I don't offend anybody here, is I think it's Foreigner. I Want to Know What Love Is. I mean, just makes you want to hurt yourself the more you have to listen to it. And that's what the world looked like. And so, I wasn't in the Cedar Valley at that time, but I was in a very similar type town, and oh boy, it was something else. So you're going to start us off tonight with a little early Des Moines and Iowa City music. Where are we headed first?
That's right. So we're going to hear some early tracks from some kind of influential bands in Des Moines and Iowa City, and kind of different flavors. I think the stuff you're going to hear from Des Moines, we're going to hear from the Hollow Men and their early demo cassette, which I didn't even hear at the time because it was so hard to find, and I only got it during the exhibit from Tom Armstrong. And you'll notice it's just a dark, kind of jangly, but, because, this idea of this college rock, this idea that radio stations were so instrumental in spreading this music around, and bands like REM and early indie bands that, would inspire local bands like the Holloman. I just love their sound from this period, and it's early, but you can still hear that classic Tom Armstrong voice that just makes you want to cry. And then we're gonna hear some stuff from Iowa City, a band called the Burlap Elevated, which was one of my favorite punk bands out of Iowa City.
All right, here we go. We're going to start off the set with the Holloman. All right, that was Burlap Elevated. Matthew, did you get to see that band live? Oh, looks like he's having a little technical difficulty. I can see him talking, but I don't hear him, so we might have to go back to his computer mic.
Yeah, I'll take full responsibility for that. I asked him to hook up his other mic, and of course that fucked it up. So,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I saw them. They played at a little club called Dean's Parkade Lounge, which I know many of you tuning into the Zoom are familiar with. But for those of you unfamiliar, there's a little, country western bar. I think right now it's the business that's there is the Wilbo's, right? And next door, that jewelry store, they had a party room. And so if you went in the front door, right, I was 15 at the time, couldn't get in, they card you. But if you went in the back door and took an immediate right to the party room, right, you could get in to see punk rock shows. And that's where I first saw Burlap Elevated, probably in 1985, I'm gonna guess.
yeah, Beth, I'm not going to say her last name for just because I don't have her permission to, but a good friend of mine is a singer there, and she's a professor now, and I can't remember where she lives, but brings back some good memories of that, and I don't want to implicate anyone, Matthew, but Dean was a sweetheart, and most old school Cedar Falls people know him, knew damn well who was drinking there. And the bar was very slow prior to our friend Chris coming there and booking shows. And he was certainly looking the other way, but he knew what was going on,
Yeah, and I have to say, a lot of folks talk about Stebbs, in the history of Cedar Falls, but I never could get in. And we're talking about shows that really kind of turned us on to this new music scene. I found out from a friend of mine, Brian Stockdale, that this band called the Dreadnecks was playing at this club called Dean's, and this was probably fall of 1985. And I remember walking there. I walked there because I couldn't even drive yet. And, I was petrified of going in. I was all by myself, and I was like, is this going to work out? What's going to happen? And I remember going in, and there was a band playing, and people were dancing like I've never seen people dance before. And I was just like, my people. There's this moment of like, this is where I want to be, and the Dreadnecks were playing. And I believe it was Paul Stannard's farewell show.
Wow.
So I got to see him play with the Dreadnecks before he left for San Francisco. And I could be misremembering that from another time, but it made a big impact on me.
So Matthew, you've answered the question about the show. I'm going to pick on Brian Powell's because I know he's got a good story. What's the show that introduced you to what I'll call punk rock?
I will actually go back to an earlier generation, and it wasn't in the Cedar Valley. It was down in Des Moines, and a bunch of bands played a festival down at what was the venue down in Des Moines? Crazy Mary's. Anyway, I saw Atoy. I saw Paul Stannard's prior band of that, A Testament of Youth, and Charlie Chesterman's band, The Law, played that show. A couple of Cedar Valley bands. These guys that I can recall them playing at Stebbs as well. They were called Yo Mama Tones. They played that show. It was a 2-day show down at Crazy Mary's in Des Moines, and a similar experience to Matthew, where I thought, yeah, these are my people. This is the scene. This is what I've wanted to hear. This is what I was looking for.
So Dave doesn't count because he got to go to the music mecca in Minneapolis. So I'm just going to exclude him from this question because I hate that about him. I'll tell mine real quick. I'm guessing it was 85, 86. So about the same time. I'm with my older sister and a young man that she dated who turned me on to a lot of great music. And I walked into the VFW hall in my hometown, just south of Des Moines. And little did I know I was about to experience Agent Orange. And with my back all the way against the wall, no stage in that venue, and them just absolutely killing it. Like every hair on my neck standing up, I was hooked. I was hooked. Wow. I'll never forget that. I just pulled up on the screen here, if you're looking, a picture of Dreadnecks, and this may be a little later version of what you're talking about, but that's the band that you're talking about. Dave, what do you got?
Oh, I was just going to say we should make a mental note to get Paul Standard on here and Chris Kenline, two of the really key figures to what was happening at that point, who, did more than talk and really walked and put some shows on and made that scene that we're talking about happen. So I'll put forth some effort and try to get those guys on here in the coming months. Who knows how long in the basement, right? We got time.
Yeah, we got time. We got plenty of time.
Yeah.
There's another picture.
Yeah, another note for those listening, the audio quality, some of these tunes, some of these are dubs of dubs, and, in the 80s, we had cassettes, which was great. We could actually record our own music, but, nobody had money for good equipment. And so it's kind of a miracle we're hearing this at all. But I apologize in advance for some of this earlier work that may be a little rough around the edges.
That picture Ralph just had, to me, captures the entire Dreadnecks. And it's important to note, too, that Dean's had an impact on Stebbs. Stebbs into some of the younger bands. Should I stop talking?
Nope. Sorry, I hit the wrong thing. I was trying to pull that picture back up. Go for it, man.
The hook, the audio hook.
Yeah.
Dean's, kind of scared Stebbs and kicked them into the contemporary music scene. The Stebbs was not willing to have underage people really at all. So it couldn't be that kind of thing. But that picture right there, and then Paul's got his melodica down there on the bar stool, was a huge Augustus Pablo fan from KUNI. So, and everything that goes with that. But that's, and Quentin there, that really says a lot, that encapsulates that pretty well. I do just want to remind everybody that I did just say do, but I want to remind everybody that you're listening to Octopus Radio. This is an audio extension of Octopus College Hill, small bar and venue in Cedar Falls, just on the block from the University of Northern Iowa. We're going to attempt to archive tonight's show over where we usually broadcast from at mixlr.com. We'll also make it available at Spotify and Apple Music. And is there anything else where it's at, Ralph?
No, those are the spots.
So we really appreciate you all listening tonight. It means a lot to us. And I also have to say very quickly, thanks to everybody who's contributed to our GoFundMe campaign and made purchases from mohairrepairshop.com. The stress is on small businesses right now, so we appreciate your help. And a little later in the program, we're going to talk about places that we're buying local here in the Cedar Valley. So maybe we can get that discussion going. So let's get back to some music.
Yeah. Matthew, do you want to talk a little? I had a little technical difficulty here when I pulled that up. So you want to talk a little bit about our next set, and I'll get those songs pulled up for us?
Sure. Well, speaking of Paul Standard's melodica, I think we're going to get to hear a little bit of that. These are 3 tracks. I first heard these tunes from a mixtape someone made from me, and they were labeled pre-Dreadnecks. And Paul Standard later told me that they were part of a band called the Acoustic Hiatus, or TAH. And if anybody can correct me on that, I'd love to know it for sure. But these are 3 songs. And the first one you're going to hear is kind of showing some of their kind of early reggae influence, and then two rockers.
All right, here we go. This is the Acoustic Hiatus.
1, 2, 3, 4. It was late, I was riding my stick. I was kind of red. Then 3 punks jumped me and tried to steal my stick. They had ice heavy drink, looking for a fight. Skater Rasmus sucks, you're lame and dumb. Skater Rasmus sucks. They were crucified, the devil in disguise, with evil in their eyes. They didn't say it, but they wanted my stick. I could tell by their eyes they were full of crap. Skater Rasmus sucks, you're lame and dumb. Skater Rasmus sucks. Go away, see you twist some other day. Anytime, anywhere, take my skate. I don't care when you twist, just stare. Skater Rasmus sucks, you're lame and dumb. Skater Rasmus sucks.
Paul Stenard,
Indeed.
the guy I've met hanging at Octopus. That had a real Dead Kennedys feel. Everybody kind of kept saying that in the chat. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's become more obvious over the years. I didn't think that when they were playing. And Paul has a very animated personality, which was a big part of the Dreadneck show, so he didn't look like, well, he looks a little like Jello Biafra, but I don't remember thinking that back in the day, but listening now I do. And that acoustic hiatus God, I haven't heard that in 30 years. And I was never around for that band. I don't remember ever seeing them play a show or anything. That was over by the time I got back. So that brought back some memories too. You are listening to Octopus Radio. We're doing the secret history of the Cedar Valley tonight, which is basically the underground and punk scene in Cedar Falls and Waterloo. We didn't call it the Cedar Valley back then. I don't know. Does anybody know when and where that came from? I'm not against it, but I just don't remember hearing that back then at all. So we're listening to the alternative and punk scene from the Cedar Valley from back in the 80s. And our special guest is Matthew Wilson. Thanks for taking the time, Matthew. Maybe before we get to music, we could go around the loop. This is a plague time, right? So what did you guys do today? Anything stick out? Did you have a good meal? What happened? Ralph?
Went on a bike ride and a walk and listened to a lot of great music today.
Matthew?
I was here in my basement digitizing music and preparing playlists, but I did get to go out. I got to go out to that little bird sanctuary south of town and got to walk through some beautiful bluebell.
Are the bluebells in bloom now, Matthew?
Bluebells are in bloom. So, and they'll be in bloom for probably a week or two more. So
We get out there tomorrow then.
Brian, what'd you do?
I cleaned some trash out of the yard and grilled out.
Nice. I played some pickleball. You guys ever done? It's tennis for the non-athletic. But Barb and I have been doing that, and that's great. And then I've been looking at buying a grill, right? So I'm walking to play pickleball, and there's a grill in my neighbor's driveway. It says free. I scored that, all the utensils. He cleaned it before he gave it away.
Yeah.
I'm really loving life right now. So it was a good day. Probably the highlight of the last 6 weeks. So I'm going to appreciate that. Let's get back to some more music. What are we going to listen to?
All right, Matthew, what is next? I had a little playlist difficulty. So if you're watching on the screen, I don't mean to give anybody whiplash. I did have it ready. And as you know, it disappeared. It wouldn't be Octopus Radio without technical difficulty. Very, very punk rock, as Matthew said.
That's right. We're about to hear, I mentioned my first show, but really my first entry point into the Iowa punk scene was, I think I was 13 or 14 and hanging out with a kid who lived on University Avenue. And we hear this guitar, this super loud guitar coming from two houses down. And my friend was really into Jimi Hendrix. He was like, it sounds like Jimi Hendrix. And so we go and he's like, I'm going to knock on his door. He knocks on the door and Clara Clark opens the door. And you can imagine, being a 13-year-old, like meeting Clara Clark for the first time. And he invites us in. And I remember he gave us a lesson he showed us how to make the guitar feedback. And he turned it to 10 and played it really loud. And I remember leaving that house thinking, damn, he's so cool. Right, he became my first punk rock idol, and this first track is by his band TAR, featuring, I know many of you know that Dave Deibler is an amazing guitar player, but I believe, Dave, this is you not playing guitar.
Well, yeah, the short story there is when I got back, I said how great the scene was, but there was no place for a guitar player. So I said, I got to get into this somehow, and my insert for the Rock and Roll Army as I parachuted in as a drummer and pretended to be one for about 6 months until I could get the hell out of there. But our first practice was great. But when you don't have a very good drummer, it's like a balloon running out of air, And I was the balloon.
No. I'm going to tell you, Dave, we listened to this like endlessly. This was a dub of a practice tape. So this is not professional quality or anything, but the performance, we loved it.
Here we go. This is Tar with Mask.
It's called Pipe Bomb. I don't mind people killing babies, so I'm gonna kill you doctors instead. The president said abortion is bad. Let the innocent live, the guilty dead.
asked for it, you got it. Crock of Dookie. Matthew, tell us about that. And here's a great picture of Crock of Dookie with a guy that we're talking to right now.
Crock of Dookie, you know, we wanted to destroy music, and I think we succeeded. You know, I love music. I wanted to be a part of music, and I really wasn't very good at it. But I heard the Jesus and Mary chain, and I heard that guitar that sounded like a chainsaw, and I was like, I bet I could do that, right? And you know, we were listening to a lot of hardcore punk, and you know, we just wanted to be loud and fast and different. And you know, we have our lead singer Bianca is on the Zoom chat with us, and so that's cool. But yeah, I don't know. People didn't like us very much, I don't think. But we had fun.
Matthew, I liked your comment. No big secret here, but we keep a thread going back channel. So things get fucked up. We talk to each other about what's going on with Octopus Radio. And Matthew said, I'm wearing a bandana. Who's going to...
Real quickly, I just have to ask, I love these types of pictures because it looks like that's somebody's garage, which means the parents have relegated that sound outside of the house.
That was actually a house show on 18th and Franklin. And you might have to refresh my memory. I believe this was 1987, maybe. And we're playing, I think there are a couple bands that played at this show. So the parents not only let us play in the garage, but actually let us have a show in the garage.
Even better.
I'm trying to think of where 18th and Franklin. Brian's over at 12th and Franklin right now, aren't you, Brian? But 18th, yeah. What house that would have been? Who knows? There's plenty of garages like that in Cedar Falls. We all know that.
I think this garage actually got destroyed in that microburst a few years ago.
Yeah, 18th Street got hit really hard, and that's right. There's no tall trees in that part of Cedar Falls to this day because that straight line wind came down 18th Street. Well, this is Octopus Radio. It's been a blast. Matthew Wilson is our special guest. My name's Dave. I own Octopus. I'm here with Ralph and Brian. Thanks to all of you for joining us, man. We appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us. Usually we broadcast from the bar and we sit around a table and we look each other in the eye and we talk and okay, we drink a few beers. And it's taken us a little bit to figure out how to do this social distancing version of the show, but we've kind of got it, and it's been fun. It's been one of my highlights of the quarantine to be able to reach out and see and talk to different people besides the other two people who are in my house. Of course, I love them, but I'm just saying. So thanks for joining us. Where are we heading next?
I did just want to ask a real quick question before we go to your next. I'm going to pull up a picture on the screen here.
Jerry.
Tell me about this gentleman.
That's Gerald Baker.
Yeah. Well, that's the Darlins, I hope I'm not getting too personal here, but like Summer Darlin and Robin.
Yeah.
That's her cousin, Gerald Baker, who ran for president back in 82, 4. I don't remember.
84. I voted for Jerry.
Brian, what was his slogan? Do you remember?
I don't recall. But he's the most learned man I ever met.
He remembered everybody's birthday from scratch. He introduced a lot of bands with these kind of Ginsbergian introductions that were kind of surreal, that didn't really have anything to do with what was going on. And then he would introduce the band, and he would dance. And Gerald was a genius for sure. And maybe beyond that, he was just scary smart and a great guy. And right now I'm not going to attempt to imitate it, but I can hear his laugh in my brain very clear. Rest in peace, Gerald Baker. You
know, in the chat, some people have been posting about kind of where that Crock of Dookie show took place in that picture. And I have this tape of Dave. And, before we got on tonight, I'll just say this is in the very beginning stages, but something I strongly believe is that, as Matthew said, a lot of this stuff exists on cassette, and that those things need to be preserved and archived and digitized in reality. I'm hoping to hop on and help him continue this work with the Secret Valley and just capture something. Gosh, we'll talk about where that will go and how we'll do that. But if you've got something in your closet and you need help, reach out. We want to help you with that because we don't want that to go away and disappear. Very important that this part of the Cedar Valley and this part of Iowa music history doesn't go away.
Excellent point. And I'm thinking you can probably return that to them if it was a cassette or something. It would be, and take it from me, Ralph is a very diligent person. So if you're worried about that, don't. And like we said earlier in the program, if you don't talk about this stuff, if you don't preserve it, if you don't save it, it just disappears, especially in a place like Iowa and in a town like Cedar Falls. You really have to pay attention to preserving art, especially underground music like this, or it's just poof, it's gone. I want to mention that we're going to do a toast later in the show. We usually do beer tasting when we're at the bar. It doesn't have to be beer or alcohol, but we usually highlight a local brewery or something when we do it at the bar. Whiskey is Matthew's drink of choice. So whiskey is a preferred thing, and we usually show what it is if it's local and stuff. But the point is to cheer ourselves and everybody out there who's getting through this and making it work, and our friendship and, all that good stuff. So we'll do that in the second half of the program. So think about that. Music now, is that what you're thinking?
You bet. I was going to ask Brian Pals a real quick question. Best house show you've ever seen, since we were talking about garage. So, and then we'll dive into our next set.
House shows. Best house show I've ever seen is right here in this basement where I'm sitting at when Tommy Stinson played here. Does that count?
Yeah.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
I can add something to the best house show I've ever been at. I saw Husker Du in Minneapolis. I know you said I could talk about this. And Spot was there, and they played a bunch of Beatles covers, and he was playing his clarinet. And it was a little intimidating, to be honest. I was young, like Matthew mentioned when he first went into Dean's, that it was, a little nerve-wracking. And I was a little nerve-wracked. And I was a little, not disappointed, but my values were thrown into question, because when I got to the party, Husker Du was there, and I did not know that at that point they were dirty hippies with beer. So my whole value system had been thrown into doubt. So it wasn't a great, I could still feel the tension, but it was a good show.
That's awesome. Okay. So where are we headed next, Matthew?
Speaking of house shows, we're going to hear from House. And I can't believe we've gotten to an hour without hearing from House. Speaking of bands that did have staying power and stuck around and just got better and better. And this is one of the first House songs I heard. And unfortunately, I couldn't find my EP version this day, but this is off of, I think it's your first LP, One Big Cake.
We receive an offense.
Ha. Can I put the delay on here? Yeah, put the delay on just to check. Ha. Okay, that's good. Hey man, get rid of that. You cannot have.
Turn down that side.
Okay. Okay. Good.
We're back loud again.
Yeah, Jesus. Thank God, man.
Okay, leave that.
Okay, ready? It's okay, because otherwise it'll be distorted, but this will be nice. Ha. Yeah, or you play the drum too, like you were doing. It was cool, man. That was great. It sounded like a fire. Like, play. Well, that too, okay. Okay, I got the short. Okay, ready? We only went through it 8 times and then we quit. Like, do. Only 8 times at the end and then quit. It's gone. Okay. Lady Lazarus, take 2. I have done it again. 1 year in every 10, I manage it. So I'll prepare my skin bright as an observation. My right foot a paper. My face a featureless font. Peel off the napkin, oh my enemy. Do I terrify? First time it happened, I was 10. It was an accident. Second time is the last time. Never come back down. I'm not sure it's a seashell. It had calm. Pigments like stereotypes. Dying was an art. Like everything else, I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I'm a poet. So here, doctor. So here at me. I am nervous. I am valueless. Here, God. Here, Lucifer. Beware. Out of the ash, rise, die, be men, like air.
All right, Matthew, I think this is a great time to do a toast.
Absolutely. And, just like to go through some of the tunes. You heard Man Overboard by House Large Sizes, a song by a local band called Psycho Trash, Like a Dog. Carpet Burns, Over the Rainbow, live at Dean's Parkade Lounge. Gardenful by the Stiff-Legged Sheep. And that last tune was Lady Lazarus by a poetry and noise-inspired band called Primitive Ritual, led by Maria Fluette, who I think would be a perfect person to toast right now. Maria passed away a number of years ago, but everyone who knew her knew how lively she was and how inspirational she could be. So I raised my glass. I'm drinking some Knob Creek bourbon myself.
I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the bar, but it's still in the car, so I'll have to go get it. But I think a toast to Maria and to anybody who's watching or listening, anybody you miss during this time. Cheers. I posted on the chat thing that I just went to. Maria's mom just passed, so I saw her family and her kids who are now adults. And it brought back a lot of great memories because I was pretty close to Maria and obviously very sad when she passed so suddenly and very concerned about her kids. So it's good to know that that they're doing great. So that meant a lot to me.
I love the quality of those recordings, the demo, the live, you talked about it earlier, Matthew. It just has such energy, and what maybe you lose in fidelity, the energy is never lost. You can just hear what was happening in those rooms. Amazing. Brian, you were literally trading for some of these things while you were in the service?
Yeah, yeah. Again, this is something that people don't do now, but in the 80s, yeah, tape by mail was a big thing, and I was involved with a network of people that were trading these weird art collage tape things, and also people that were doing like punk rock tapes and hardcore tapes. And I started trading with this guy from Iowa City who is in the band 149 Dead Marines, John Benjamin from 149 Dead Marines. And I was in the Marines, and so I would send him Marine Corps paraphernalia, and he would send me tapes, and he sent me a compilation that had Stiff-Legged Sheep, and that's where I first heard them.
You know, I earlier today I pulled out a few of my cassettes. I don't have too many anymore. I did get rid of many of the ones that I wore out. But the compilation ones that people made for me, I still have. Like, I don't even know if any of them play anymore, but I've kept them all this time just because of the sentimental value and the music that was included. Like a band that we talked about on Messenger today was a band called Full Fathom 5, and their song "I Want to Run for President" was on one of those. And I just couldn't find it anywhere like to include today, and I can't play that cassette. It's just trash, but I still have it because of what's on it.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember is, at the time, the fidelity of these recordings, I mean, we didn't really know. I mean, obviously you heard like well-produced rock albums or something. Yeah, they sounded good, but I think we were just overjoyed to actually capture the sound on some medium. And, like I think we were talking on the chat about how some of these songs were traded and played and put on mixtapes and exchanged by many people. And, something to remember.
Yeah, I don't think anybody making some of those tapes ever thought that 30, 35 years later that we'd be listening to them and talking about them in detail. And that's, as we've mentioned a couple of times during this show, I think that's really important. A town like Minneapolis, I think, is the poster child for a local scene. And I don't say this to piss you off, Ralph. I say it because they have a cycle of supporting local artists. So it's like planting a garden that you live there and you know that they support local music. So you see something in it and you want to get involved, right? And here it's a little more difficult to keep the momentum going. And I'm not saying that we're keeping that momentum going, but we're just trying to do a little part to not forget this and remember that there's been an original music scene in the Cedar Valley for 40 or 50 years, and that we're all a part of that, and we need to keep it going, and you have to give something back. And this is our way of giving just a little back and having fun at the same time. So once again, thanks for joining us at Octopus Radio. It means a lot. Got a lot more music coming. My personal thanks to Ralph and Brian and Matthew for taking the time. My personal thanks for all of you who have taken the time around the country. And I know last time we did the show, the Zoom pandemic version of Octopus Radio, we had a couple of people outside the country, somebody from Scotland, I think, and I can't remember from where else, which reminds me, we have a couple guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking to a guy named Jordan David Schaefer, who has played at Octopus a couple times, a local musician, and he's a nurse in England right now. So we're going to talk to him about his experience of what he's doing over there.
Thanks, Dave. You made a comment about making sure you keep a scene going and you pay attention to it. And this is a time that's ultra important, maybe even more important than it was. It's always been important, but just very important considering what's going on. As you may or may not know, Dave runs a club called the Octopus, and Barb mans the ship at Mohair Pear. This is an example of lots of businesses out there that need our support. We've been talking about Dean's Parkade Lounge. We've been talking about Stebbs. The Octopus scratches that itch, I got ahead of myself, for a lot of people, and really has the same intent and desire to kind of cater to people who love music. It's a really important time to support them. There's a lot of ways to do that by, there's a survival fund for Octopus, there's gift cards. And when that day comes, hopefully soon, that we can safely be there, get out to a club, get out to a restaurant and support them.
Yeah. And thanks for mentioning Octopus, Ralph, but also wherever you're living right now. And I'm sure you're doing it to support what's around you, because that's where it starts, right? So our governor's saying some scary stuff right now about wanting to open up in a week. Well, I can't do that to my employees. We're peaking out there in the next 2 weeks for COVID-19. So it's a confusing, stressful time when we need some leadership and we're not getting it. So my heart goes out to other small businesses that hopefully wherever they're at, are getting some more clear facts and data from their leadership than we are, because it's very confusing. And I've said before when we talk about this, I hope it doesn't come across as complaining, because I'm not complaining. I'm very fortunate for where we're at. We had prepared not for this, but we were in a pretty good place. But I know a lot of small businesses aren't going to survive without help from you, right? So we all got to do our part, myself included. So once again, thanks for listening to Octopus Radio. Are we ready for some more music, or what do you guys want to do?
Matthew.
We are ready for some aggressive chubbies, and this is a band from the metropolitan area of Fayette, Iowa. Band I met on June 4th, 1986. I know the exact day. I remember, they were an unforgettable group of people, just unbelievable guys. And I think they were one of the best hardcore bands that, our area has produced. And so I got a set of 4 songs from the Aggressive Chubbies. So let's hear them.
Bro!
The Aggressive Chubbies. That was fantastic.
They were awesome. My favorite memory, we went on a little tour with them once to Des Moines, and you know, when you met the Aggressive Chubbies, I mean, they were head to toe covered in leather and mohawks and just as punk rock as you could be. And we stopped at that little Casey's in Albion, Iowa. And
The Albion Cutoff.
The Albion Cutoff. Dave knows that well. And my dad was driving me, and I think we still had Vanna at that point, Dave. And we all got out of this van, and my dad was dressed in a three-piece suit, and we walked into this Casey's, and I don't think they knew what to do. I think they thought, I don't know what they thought. I remember there was a farmer sitting at the counter, and he just looked at everybody and said, "What planet do you boys come from?"
Oh, hold on, Dave. You're on mute. There you go. I got you.
Thank you. I'm glad you gave a visual description of the Aggressive Chubbies, because it was a work of art, almost separate from the music, a part of it, obviously, but you didn't forget that when they walked into a room. So I'm sure that Casey's and Albion saw a few things.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was their first rodeo that way, because any band coming from Des Moines, from up here, was the only place to stop before it came, right? So we were there so many damn times. We obviously wrote a song about it, but I also remember once there was a house on fire, and it was like 2 a.m, and we were just so bored that we stopped and parked near and watched it burn. The good old, right?
I have to pause and say, your dad was driving you and the band to the show?
He was. He was very supportive of the music. They even showed up at Dean's Parkade Lounge one night. You know, they found out I was going to this bar downtown, and they kind of wanted to check it out. And, they put on an old army jacket. My dad even scruffed up his hair a little bit. And they showed up at Dean's.
What did they think?
I got to go back.
Yeah, Barry, I basically live in the same neighborhood as Matthew's parents. So I see your father on his bike quite a bit, riding around. So, and then I won't go on about it, but you said you were driving in Vanna, which is Vanna Red and White, which became the House of Large Sizes van for 4 years after that. And we took it all over hell. It was a GMC rally van with a 400 engine in it. And Dave Berg's mom made recycled some tie-dyed clothing and put curtains in it. That was our security plan. And I guess it worked because we never got anything ripped off. But that van was very near and dear to my heart. And then it ended up in Chicago delivering beer for the Bell's Brewing Company in Michigan, and probably in some junkyard right now. But Vanna was a van among vans.
It was.
Thanks to the Wilsons for taking such good care of her.
Well, I don't know if we took good care of it, but, when you have 8 kids, there's only so much you can do.
That's an amazing story. I think that parents have to have a lot of understanding when their kids like find their way, because it's never what you thought it might be. But as a father, and all 4 of us are fathers, it's better actually when you get to see it through your child's eyes. So hats off to your dad for doing that. Brian, go ahead.
I'll tell you a story about a local venue, and I think maybe all of us are maybe of a generation past this, but there used to be shows out there at the FSU house over by Happy Chef. And I was too old to have ever gone to the FSU house, but my daughter went there, and I recall her, and it was one of her first punk rock shows. And she went to some show at the FSU house, and she comes back, and I said, "Well, how was the show?" And she said, "Dad, the band got naked." And I said, "All the way naked?" She said, "All naked."
Did she go back?
She went back.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Just, it depends. Naked's a big word. I do remember the FSU house, and oh God, the names are escaping me. It was, I think, Sean Reed. Does that sound familiar? Those guys?
Yeah.
Who played in some bands that kind of did okay out of Iowa City. And anyway, there's another FSU house like in California or on the East Coast, and they made our FSU house change their name. You guys remember that at all? They wrote them.
How punk rock.
Don't fucking change your name. We're going to fuck your shit up.
Oh, man. Okay, so somebody in the chat is saying not Sean, Josh Otten, or Cam Myers. Dave?
Okay, I was an old man by then. I would totally take that reporting over anything I have to offer to that. I never went to a show at there. I would just been there again. I would have felt 100 years old.
I will say I did get to go to a show there right at the end, because it was right around the time I was doing the secret history research. So I did get to go to one show, but unfortunately, I think it was busted by the cops about 3 songs in.
FSU, baby.
Sounds like a punk rock show.
That's right.
Okay, so speaking of that, Matthew, I'm going to let you take the next segment of music, because we're going to start off with a younger man of this old man.
That's right. You're about to hear Mr. Dave Deibler at the tender age of introducing a band, Triple F20, which was a solo project of a man named Ed Ware, who became the lead singer of the Dreadnecks. And this next set is a couple songs that we've been listening to, a lot of kind of hardcore, aggressive, noisy stuff. And this next set is kind of more artsy.
Music from the LP Walk Together, Rock Together by request, 7 Seconds on the Positive Force record label. We heard their version of 99 Red Balloons. Just prior to that, also by request, music from the Cocteau Twins. From the Treasure LP, we heard Evo. You may hear a little bit more from them a little later on in the show. Next, we have some material recorded and produced locally, which is kind of a rarity. This is music from Triple F20.
would she do what she did to me? Shoveling behind all that I could not see. The strength we shared was full of love. But you were the fingers and I was the glove. I was the glove. I was the glove. I was the glove. Time keeps on clicking till the sound is just a sound. Feelings left to shiver on the bed or on the ground. How can this life we share complete the final circle of the course that's been followed by the few important people? Whoa, 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 walking through the buildings, feeling lost and small, taking time to follow the never-ending walls. Whoa, 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 lights seem to flicker the farther along I go. My life is a shadow in the darkness below. Whoa, 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 whoa.
is rising from the ghetto. Bullets flying into Soweto. Whips and gas and so much killing. Rubber bullets for the children. All these little trickles make a big flood. People drowning in tears and blood. Two war just leaving the night. White men sleeping very night. Gun under pillow, living in pride. This is the price of apartheid. Whoa! Mr. Boda, be outnumbered 10 to 1. Mr. Boda's not afraid, he's got them outgunned. The body count is getting higher and higher. Cities burn from friendly fire. All these little trickles make a big flood. Mr. Boda, he's not afraid, he's on the run. Terror's ringing, it's ringing in your ears. So grab a hostage to calm your fears. White man rules, you better get used to it. Or pretty soon now, you'll be eating shit. Mr. Boda, he's got you by the balls. Mr. Boda's not afraid, he's got the claw. See you all just leaving the night. White man sleeping very night. Gone under pillow, living in pride. This is the price of apartheid. Woo!
All right. That last track was Artificial Limb Embrace, which was a band that Ed Ware formed as the Dreadnecks were recording their second project, and that band he kept going with when he moved to Lincoln, Nebraska.
And before that, we heard.
Before that was the Dreadnecks, one of their unreleased tracks. I'm not sure if this was an outtake from their second release or a recording that just never got released anywhere, but definitely from a later period of the Dreadnecks with Ed Ware on vocals there. And before that was an Iowa City band, Stick Dog, that played in Cedar Falls at least once, and later went on to move to San Francisco and record with Alternative Tentacles Records.
I saw Stick Dog at Gilman Street.
Wow.
Yeah, when they had moved out there, and we played there, which for a band like me, honestly, it was a hell place to play. You know, it was just fairly intimidating. It was so entrenched in that kind of punk rock. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Exactly welcoming, to be honest with you, to other forms of, and it was truly run by, you know, the kids, which means nobody was fucking run. That could be a little frightening sometimes. You know, there were some pretty macho guys running around the joint, not to take away from what Gilman Street has done over the last, you know, decades. And I don't actually know if it's still going, but I remember seeing those guys and knowing that they had put a record out on Alternative Tentacles was pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think, you know, their sound was, you know, very different. You know, I can't think of another Iowa band that kind of had a sound like theirs. They were definitely one of a kind. And, you know, I think for them moving out to San Francisco, I know Iowa Beef Experience had moved out there at one point, as I remember, or am I making that up? Maybe that's STT that moved out there and then ended up coming back.
There's a direct pipeline, or there was, between San Francisco and Iowa. And so many bands ended up there out at that time, because when we would go out there to play, we would never have a problem finding a place to stay or hanging out with people. And everybody was very generous with their time and their places to stay. So especially Iowa City to San Francisco was a big deal back then.
Yeah, that's where the Oddfellows wound up.
Right. And they, one of my favorite bands, and, you know, maybe just a bit ahead of their time, but, you know, they had some commercial appeal. The Oddfellows Union 282, Thinking Fellers Union 282. Is that what you were talking about, Brian, or something?
Yeah, no.
Because those guys, I would highly recommend. I know that stuff is out there. Thinking Fellers Union 282. If you haven't heard of them, you should check it out.
Who were you thinking of, Brian?
No, that's who I was thinking of.
Oh, you were? Okay.
It's the whiskey talking.
It's also not a name that just rolls right off your tongue.
Yeah.
You know, I thought there was something important that's coming up as kind of themes for this show. There's some kind of pillars that are standing out. KU and I, my goal from the time I was like 13 or 14 was to work there and be a DJ. And in some ways, my life peaked too early because I was able to do that being a student employee. And I just was so happy. I was their youngest on-air statistician when I was like 12 or 13 because I was just crazy about the music they were playing and had assumed that it had been there forever. And I think they started like just mere months before I started listening. I think it was like 75 or 6 when KU and I moved up to a larger signal. Anyway, they're an important part of the scene that we're talking about. And I know from talking to other Cedar Falls people, you took it for granted that there was this cool radio station playing 4 and 5 hours a night of punk and alternative. And then the second thing that comes up is a lot of this stuff was recorded at Grand Junction. And Jeff and Sandy ran this place out of their house. And it was a super affordable recording studio. And it was tape when I recorded there. I think it might have been 8-track when I first went there. He was super non-judgmental. And, you know, he ran it as a business, which, not to say that he liked some stuff more than others, but he was just professional. And, you know, you'd be in there and recording while they were cooking dinner and stuff. So not that professional. But Jeff is one of those pillars in Grand Junction, too. I think the places that needs to be remembered for their role in the Cedar Valley scene.
And I do want to let our listeners know that the tapes Dave is referring to are literally sitting behind the bar at Octopus. So if you ever want to come in and steal them, just distract Dave with some deviled eggs and you'll be good.
If you're going to steal them, just take them. How stealing works, Ralph. You got to just take it.
Where are we headed next, Matthew?
Well, we're talking about favorite house shows, and I got a good house story. Going to hear a set of some of our favorite House Large Sizes songs, and I came back to Cedar Falls pretty much every Christmas, sometimes in the summer, and I remember one New Year's Eve. It was, I spent time with my family, and I didn't have anything going on. I was just kind of wandering around the hill, and I hear this noise, and it's just huge noise. It's like, is something going on up there? And I remember looking at Stebbs, and all the windows were just steamed up with condensation, and the place was like pulsating. And I remember like, oh, is there a show? I wonder who it is. And I go and kind of look in the window. I could just make out Barb and Dave like on stage. I was like, oh, it's fucking House, right? How lucky was that, right? And I remember I just went in and just kind of dove into it. And I can't stress enough, if you haven't seen House of Large Sizes, in person, they were just a force to be reckoned with. Dave, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a review that came out, I think, in a zine after your first EP, and they said, Dave Deibler's guitar sounds like he keeps it in a cage and only feeds it once a week or something like that. This first song we're going to hear is from an album called Idiots Out Wandering Around, which was all live recordings of House, and it's one of my favorite records just because I think it captures the kind of energy of those live performances. And we're going to hear some heavy bass lines.
Please welcome House of Large Sizes.
Celebrating the overwhelming abundance of green lightning, green
all stuck up. It happens every day, the one that slips away. I'm not the only one, I'm not the only one. Is that a cigarette, a purple cigarette? How lucky can you get? Hey, 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 hey. I'm not taking it now, I didn't take it then. Can you move it along? Can you say pretend? Are we learning some things? Are we planning some things? Can you sing along? Pay, 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 pay. It happens every day. You're paying bills in the sun. Am I the only one? Am I the only one? Am I the only one? Are we almost done? Fun, 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 fun. Stop!
All right. That was House of Large Sizes. Those last two tracks were live tracks recorded by my good friend Tim Jameson at Gabe's Oasis, December 28th, 2007. I believe that was the first reunion run of House of Large Sizes. And I was recording music at that time, and my wife made me promise not to do it so we could get up front and just act like it was the old days. That was a lot of fun.
I didn't know we were doing a House of Large Sizes set. I have to start going to the pre-production meetings.
Oh, Dave.
Thanks for playing that. It brings back some memories. Somebody, I think Matthew mentioned the bass on Green Lightning, which is pretty. That custom when you dialed it in was just, it's a transistor amp, not tubes, and you just get it to that point, and it just breaks up so wonderfully. And the only quick story I would say about that song is Brent, our drummer, had been in the band for like 2 weeks, and we were playing some festival down in Des Moines, and the set was going pretty well. And I said, well, I have this song. You guys want to try it? And, we did Green Lightning, and it's, it just was that song from the first time we played it. And as a result of that, we can't play it anymore. There's something, we can't figure it out. And I know when you listen to that, it sounds pretty simple, but there's just something, it's just about it, but we can't quite get it because, Brent, our drummer, still the drummer to this day, was such a trooper, because we played the song 2 days later, and I just thought I admired Brent and Barb for just being like, fuck it, let's just play it. Not only that, but we, one of our slogans on Octopus Radio is, overreaching our limitations since 2014 or whatever. I also firmly believed in that because, we opened with that song, at I think it was Laser something, some radio station. Anybody remember that? Anyway.
It was at the Ankeny Airfield, the Laser 103.3 Man Cow Luau. I was at that show.
Man cow, what the fuck?
Well, I posted in the chat, Dave. I remember my first, and I said this last weekend when we talked to Jim Roth and when Mike Sangster was on. Growing up just south of Des Moines, I knew about a lot of Iowa bands. I never got to see many of them. My older sister and her musical interests kind of intersected with mine. And like I said earlier in the show, she dated a guy who turned me on to a lot of great music. I was very lucky to know him for that reason. I knew of House of Large Sizes, but I never obviously got to see you until I came to UNI in the early 90s. And my first show would have been the lineup that's on my screen right now. And I remember, and I posted this in the chat, you were a Pioneer Seed ball cap. And it looks like, I think you gave that away and somebody's son is wearing that now, which is kind of cool. But the other thing I'll say about Dave Berg, fast forward a few years from that show, and I'm being inducted into the Teacher College of Education, and I sit down and there sits Dave Berg right next to me, which was kind of cool, actually. So I don't know if he's still teaching or if he had a chance to teach. But I remember kind of leaning over and saying, I really enjoyed those shows, man. Thanks a lot. I remember that very well. So seeing his picture there kind of brings up that great memory.
Yeah, Dave was a nice guy. I met him in a math class, and Barb and I had been preparing to get a band together, and you know how those things go. And we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And a couple of weeks had gone by, and then Barb looked at me and said, we should probably tell Dave Berg, because we hadn't reached out to him, but he was already, in our minds, he was already signed up and ready to go. And thankfully he said, yes, he was interested. So he was a very unique drummer, and he walked the bridge of being unique, but was a great timekeeper too. So I miss playing with him.
Unbelievably minimalistic kit. That's what I remember from that show. His kit was incredibly small, but he made the most of it.
I think we're getting close to the end of the show, and I don't have a clock. Amazing with all the technology around me that we've got a little more time, but I do want to remind everybody that you're listening to Octopus Radio, a show that comes to you from Octopus, which is a small bar and venue in the College Hill neighborhood of Cedar Falls, Iowa. And especially during this pandemic and the quarantine that we're all going through, this has become an important way to reach out and to keep the bar, Octopus, and our other business, Mohair Pear, kind of, remind people that we're still there. And we really appreciate you listening. It means a lot. And I also just want to say that this program will be archived over at mixlr.com and Spotify and Apple Music. So if you know anybody who would like to hear it and wasn't able tonight, please tell them that. And I'll make a post on social media about that. So it looks like we got about 40 minutes. What are we going to do next?
Matthew?
Well, this is the interesting part of the show where we're kind of getting out of the 80s finally. And, this is kind of where I left town, and all the music we're about to hear, this is all music I discovered just as part of the research of doing this Secret History project. And it's just been fun for me to uncover great music that was made right here in the Cedar Valley, while I was gone. And, luckily I was able to keep touch with some of it because I have, 5 younger brothers who all got involved with it. So we're going to hear a set from music from kind of the early to mid 90s now, starting off with Mugwump.
Surround, solution about, wonder why. powerful, I must be a god. I'm so good at everything, I must be a god. I'm so witty, I'm so cool, I must be a god. My face so strong, you will remember it, I must be a god. Zeus, Odin, Poseidon, Athena, they are nothing compared to me. Zeus, Odin, Poseidon, Athena, because I rule so masterfully, I can destroy you, yes I can, just by looking away. I can have any girl that I want, I must be a god. I can have all the money in the world, I am a god. I'm so tall, I tower over you, I must be a god. Zeus, Odin, Poseidon, Athena, they are nothing compared to me. Zeus, Odin, Poseidon, Athena, they nothing masterfully, I sit upon. I sit up on my mountain, I am a god. I control every being, I am a god. All the gods that you have heard of, they worship me. I created everything, I even created me. The world a little bit better. With a dying breath, he wrote the final suicide note. Dear everyone, I'm dead now, so you can truly tell your friends that I am a failure. I always was. By telling me that I was no good, and that long hair is bad, or a sin, whatever. You froze my poetic vegetarian dreams of LSD and Janis Joplin. To meet the superstars of yesterday I go. Jimmy, Jim Morrison, and Buddy Holly. They were of the heavens, and now I am too. But I'm not sorry. It's your fault. Goodbye, or whatever. Bob. That was one no, but there are a couple more. These are the ones that I found on the floor. This is the next note. They're on the guitar. her dying breath, she wrote the final suicide note.
Matthew?
Yeah, that was Fantasy Kitchen. Those last two tunes were both by Fantasy Kitchen, a band from the area that was reputedly formed at the YMCA summer camp in 1990. That was I Must Be a God and Suicide Notes. Before that, the band Fist Puppet. And Dave, I think you're the one who gave me this track because I didn't have this one. And then we started off with Mugwump with a song called Effigy.
You know, this is boy, here in Fist Puppet and Mugwump, we're right at the beginning of my time at UNI and my time in Cedar Falls. Boy, that really takes me back. I vaguely remember Fantasy Kitchen, and in the chat we started having the great conversation about the Garden and seeing shows there. That was a great spot. Great coffee house type vibe. But boy, that takes me right back to the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah.
Stuff started in that building. We were talking about hyperspace in the chat or in the Facebook Messenger thing, and there's a record store there with Tom, and Mohair Pear started in the basement there, and so just a lot of stuff. Cup of Joe was there briefly. Just a ton of stuff, started out of that location on College Hill, which is, for people who care, is now limited edition comics and Wild Hair Barbershop.
Yeah, so this next set is kind of continuing that same vein, kind of early mid-90s. I'm going to start out with a band called Bout Had It, and then a band my brother was in called Slug Hive that I really love. And then a band that people know very little about called Late 11. You'll know when they come on. Apparently, I think it was at Co-op Records, somebody just showed up one day with a couple cassettes and asked if they could sell them at the store, and I think it was Chuck Hoffman that bought one and loved it, and then couldn't find out who made it because they never came back to the store to collect their money or something. And so this is kind of one of those unsung hero tracks where we don't really know who made this. There's someone around here. So let's start out with Bout Had It.
Not as if I agree with that man in any way. It's all about being by the police on foot, on your bike, or in your car, they cannot search you, your property, or your car unless there is illegal activity in sight. You don't have to give them more than your name or ID. You always have the right to remain silent.
Man, we ended really well. Matthew, tell us about those.
Absolutely. That was the inimitable Steve Potter and his band Page 5 Girl with Chrome Rocket Takeoff from their first demo cassette. And before that, the mystery band Lid 11 with Dustbusters Circus.
Anyone know who was in that band?
You know, I think Chuck Hoffman did ultimately talk to the guy who made the cassette. He solved the mystery. I'll have to reach out to him and fill people in because it was an interesting story.
It wasn't actually Chuck then.
Who knows? He could have been pulling an Andy Kaufman on me, you know? The mystery cassette.
That's an interesting era to me because I wasn't around a lot. So a lot of the stuff I'm hearing, I've heard this stuff before, but I don't know much about it. So I'm learning something, and that's cool.
Yeah.
As I said before, that was an era that I was around, and so it really brings back, like, way back in the cobwebs of my brain. Holy cow!
Well, for instance, you said Page 5 Girl?
Page 5 Girl.
Did they ever play at Stebbs?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, again, I wasn't around either, Dave, but you know, I think they released 5 full-length cassettes.
Yeah.
I want to say, Dave, that I saw Page 5 Girl at the old Reverb.
Okay. So later than that, Stebbs, is what I'm thinking if they played at the Reverb.
Right.
Okay, that gives some time frame. I just want to remind everybody that you're listening to Octopus Radio, the audio outreach of Octopus College Hill, a bar and venue up on the College Hill neighborhood, just down the block from the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I think what we're going to do here is talk a little bit more, and then I'd invite anybody at the end. Ralph's going to unmute everybody, and we chant Octopus Radio 5 times. So if you want to do that, and it's quite a hell ride too with the latency in Zoom. It makes you question your reality and sanity when you're doing it, but we would ask you to make that sacrifice, right?
Yeah, we would.
One other important thing I want to say is to reassure anybody who's listening tonight that of all these bands, that right now the scene in Cedar Falls is good. And I'm going to mention some bands, and maybe Ralph can help me out. But we've got like the Hex Girls, we've got Twins, we've got Johnny Dexter, any number of bands. We've got Honeyswell.
We had Peas and Carrot. We get regional talent from Des Moines with Brother Trucker and Brooks Strauss. The scene is just ripe with great music. Dave and I collaborated last year, speaking of a labor of love, on the Octopus Live vinyl compilation. There are still a handful of copies available for that. If you'd like to purchase one, you can do that at octopuscollegehill.com or mohairpearshop.com. What a ton of fun that was to put out some live recordings happening at the Octopus. A great document of what's happening in Cedar Falls right now. So it has not ended by any stretch.
Yeah, the cycle continues, and there's 11 bands on that comp. 8 of them are local, which is an amazing statistic when you think about it, And so what we're doing is working, and I don't know if fighting is the right word, but working against the tide that is going on right now against live music and venues. And let's just say this, it's not a growth industry, right? So it's what the Cedar Falls and Waterloo and the Cedar Valley are doing is working, but it's a perilous journey. So we need to be active, and we need to support venues, not just here, but wherever you're at. And once again, thanks for listening to Octopus Radio. What else do we have to talk about before we do the mega chant?
I'd like to just pause and really appreciate everything that Matthew brought tonight. This is probably a small sample of what he's got. And I would tell you that, holy cow, what an amazing labor of love to make that happen. I really appreciate that you shared this with us, and I'm looking forward to helping you in the future, I hope, with this continued project.
Yeah, there's more work to do. And, as I said on the chat, I think we're going to have some exciting announcements next year. And
My name is Lorraine.
Got a little ahead of myself. Keep going, Matthew.
Yeah, I think, we stopped the Secret History Project in 2007.
I'll help you out here. Hold on.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Mind fuck.
Yeah, we stopped the Secret History in 2007, and between today and 2007, that's 13 years of music that we don't have on the site and we don't have documented. So we're about to enter a new phase of development where we're really going to be focusing on the last 13 years and collecting all that material and trying to make it available. And Ralph's mantra has been release the tapes, get the music out there, get the information out there. So
it's very important that the world hears this. I totally agree with you, Matthew.
And you obviously have an open invitation. We'll do a part 2 and a part 3 somewhere down the line, and hopefully, on the physical grounds of Octopus. I think it should be an ongoing project that we should just keep at, and maybe incorporate some of the newer stuff should be a goal too.
Absolutely. We got to the mid 90s. We got, a lot more to cover here. And I think
that was just the other day, right?
That's right. And I think as we saw, Ralph, there was a period of time that he was particularly attuned to because he has an emotional connection to it. I have a particular time, but hearing it all together just kind of gives you a sense of the breadth of the creative industry and music that has been brewing in this area for the last 30, 40 years. And I think that's something to keep in mind.
Amen, brother.
Are we ready? Thank you, Matthew.
We're not.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matthew. That was so rewarding.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. And like I said, let's do it again.
Okay.
We're not ready for this.
I'm going to try to unmute some people.
Ralph's going to lead us.
Here we go. Octopus Radio.
Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio. Octopus Radio.
And I wake up in a flurry and my mind starts to worry about what I'm about. And it's talking